Not all black totes with yellow lids are created equal. All right, so I realize that I'm late to the tote storage game here, but I've been seeing these things all over social media, and this is exactly what I needed, so I built one. And I'm making the video here today just to show you really how easy and simple of a project this can be, and how it's probably one of the best ways to store your totes.
So here's a set of plans that I came up with, and they're pretty simple. It consists of two bottom rails, a series of vertical ladders, and then horizontal rails at the top that connect everything together. And then the cool thing is all the bins slide in individually and then sit on those horizontal rails. And then here's my cut list, or kind of better detailed view of what I have going on. If you pause the video here, you should be able to grab these dimensions and kind of apply them to the project you may want to build. For me, the way that I built this, I use pretty much all 2x4s. And when I'm building a project like this, I like to use a little bit higher quality 2x4. So I stepped up to these Douglas fir 2x4s. They're so much nicer because they have less knots and they're a whole lot straighter. The only other material that I used was that 1x material up there that's also pine. And you'll see how I use that to help reduce the height of this. The first major building step of this whole thing was to cut the materials. And that's kind of the nice thing about having a cut list like this ready, is that you have everything planned out and you see every single part that you're going to need to build this entire project. And one thing that makes a project like this go a whole lot faster, if you can try to make things repeatable and figure out how many pieces you need, cut all those pieces to length at the beginning so that when you're working later on in the project, you already have everything cut and it's just more of assembly and putting things together. So that's exactly what I did here, marking things out, cutting all my pieces to length so that I had everything that I needed later. When it came time to cut out the horizontal rails, there were a ton of them, and I wanted to be as efficient as possible in using my materials as I could. So I knew that I had 8-foot 2x4s, and I could make my horizontal rails just short of 32 inches. So when I marked them out, I marked the first one 1/16 of an inch short of 32 inches. I cut that one out, and then I used that one as a marker, and I lined it up and marked out the second one. What the cool thing was, when I marked these out, it kind of showed me where my saw blade was going to go. And so when I cut these out, they were all the same exact size, all 1/16 of an inch short of 32 inches. It doesn't matter that it's 1/16 of an inch short. They're all equal size, and that's the thing that matters. And I'm using my materials really efficiently so that I'm not wasting a whole lot at the end. And 32 ends up being a really perfect number for holding these storage bins. After quite a few more cuts, I double checked my cut list, made sure that I had all my pieces ready to go, and then I was ready for assembly. The assembly process starts with making the ladders. Here I have both of the vertical pieces laid out next to each other so that I can mark them out on one board and transfer those measurements to both boards. Then once I have those measurements marked, I'm going to go ahead and lay out those horizontal pieces just to get this thing mocked up. To attach the rails to the vertical pieces, I'm pre-drilling and screwing all of these in. Might be a little bit overkill, but when I'm attaching screws in the end of a 2x4 like this, I think it's a good idea to pre-drill them. You can see that I'm holding that board in place using a speed square to keep it square. And then you can see that I started off this first one with 4 screws. I later learned that it's probably just a good idea to put 2 screws in each one of them to start, and then you can come back and add more screws later if you need to. The other thing that I found out that made this a whole lot easier was that if you attach the bottom rail first, you move all the way up to the top, and then attach the top rail, that'll keep kind of everything square. Then I moved in and did kind of the middle rail to make sure everything was still lined up, and then I attached the rail above it and below it, and it worked out pretty well to make these ladders. Once all the ladders were assembled, I lined them up on edge roughly in the places that they were going to go. I kind of thought this was going to be the easiest way to attach them all together. To start attaching all these together, I started off with the bottom plate. For the bottom plate, this is where I'm going with a different piece of lumber. This is a 1x or 3/4 of an inch thick piece of pine by 3.5 inches wide. I'm using this not because I really want to, but because I needed to make the total storage unit a little bit shorter to fit underneath the joist in my basement. So this is 0.75 rather than the 1.5 inch thickness of the 2x4, and that's going to buy me that space that I actually need. If I had unlimited space, I'd be using a 2x4 here. Then I repeated that same process up top to connect all the ladders together. The only difference this time is I'm actually using a 2x4 to do this like I really wanted to in the first place. And then really the only thing I had to do was kind of rotate it around and then lift it up right here to see if any tote bins are going to fit in this thing.
So at this point, this project's pretty much finished. Everything's all put together and all the bins are in place. And you can see, hopefully by the video, this really didn't take that long. This was done in a weekend. It probably took me longer to do all the measurements and figure out the sizes of the bin and figure out the size of my space, how I was going to space everything and put everything together, make my plans and my cut list, than it actually did to build this thing. Hopefully you could see in the video that I went through, just cut all my materials, screwed everything together, and this was the result, not too many hours later. So really not a bad project overall. I mean, if we're ranking on this on the difficulty scale, this is probably pretty low, but the result that you get and what this is going to offer me is going to be huge in the way of storage. So when we take a look at storage, I think one of the awesome things about this is every one of the bins is individually addressable or accessible. Before, when we stored everything in bins like this, you had 5 bins high or 6 bins high, and you had that bin on the bottom that you never wanted to get to just because you didn't want to take the 5 or 4 bins off the top of it. Now, every single one of these bins you have access to at any given time. And it's not a pain in the butt. It makes you more willing to actually probably go store things in here because you can just pull things out and it's so easily accessible. You're not sitting there dreading pulling all the bins off of each one of them. You don't have to worry about overloading them too much because the bin on the bottom has all the weight of all the bins on top of them. They're only holding their own weight, which is really kind of nice. So storage like this, I think, is really efficient. Like I said, I saw this on social media and thought it was a genius idea. I always thought shelves were a great way to do this because you could put the bins on there and you could slide them on and off the shelves. I think this is even more of an efficient way of doing this because if you look at the very minimal amount of room that is in between each one of these bins, you're saving so much space. If I was using a shelf, in my space, I probably would have lost at least 1 bin off the top just because of the thickness of each one of the shelves, unless I built some really stupid thin shelves, and then I might not have been happy with the strength or anything like that. So I've never been as excited as I am about storage right now. I built some shelves in my garage that definitely helped with organization and storage, but this kind of takes it to a new level. The fact that we're able to put 17 bins, not 18, and you'll see why later, but 17 bins in such a compact area is really going to help us organize things and get things going. Now, all the positive things aside, there are a few other things that I kind of want to address here. If you take a look at this, it does rack a little bit as the way it stands, so you can move this thing around pretty decently the way that it's there. I think it's pretty sturdy, but it does move around a little bit. You guys will see, I'll show you here in a second, where I'm going to end up putting this, not in my garage where I park the cars. But I'll show you where I put this, and I won't have that problem. It's going to be in a really confined space. It's going to be screwed into the ceiling. There's going to be a wall on one side, so it's not going anywhere. But if you were putting this on a wall in your garage, something like this, you could always screw it to the wall of your garage itself. The nice thing about these bins is they're tapered down, so from the top to the bottom, they get smaller on the bottom. You have room to put a 2x4 like on the back side in between these vertical pieces that would help stop that rack. You could also get some plywood and put a plywood panel on the back and almost kind of box it in like a cabinet. There's a bunch of different ways that you could strengthen this up, but it's pretty darn strong. And speaking of strength, I wouldn't have necessarily needed to make all of these horizontal rails out of 2x4s. It's just what I felt comfortable with doing. It's what I wanted to do. I felt like it was going to make each one of these ladders even a little bit more stronger so that it didn't rack to the front or back any. You can use, I think they're called 2x2s. They're like 1.5 by 1.5. They're essentially kind of like a 2x4 ripped down the middle. Those are okay. Those are probably fine, and they would probably hold all of the weight of these totes, even though we put a ton of crap in our totes. Those would probably be fine and hold just fine. I've just had really bad luck with those, getting ones that are straight. They always seem to curve or bend or bow, and I wanted these nice and smooth and flat so that the bins slid in and out pretty nicely. Other things that I did, screwing these in, pre-drilling and screwing these. You would not have to pre-drill and screw all of these. I pre-drilled them because, yet again, I've had bad luck with 2x4 splitting. I went to the trouble of buying a little bit nicer 2x4, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't have them split and come out. So for most of them, like in these center ones, you saw that I put 2 3-inch screws and then I came back and put one 4-inch screw that went all the way through and then into the other side, so we shouldn't have any problems there. And then I think on the outsides I ended up putting 4 3-inch screws, so way overkill on the number of screws and different things like that. But while I had these things out and while I were building them, I figured I might as well do it right, you know, so to speak. I think it would be probably just as strong if you got out an air nailer and you nailed these things in here. Heck, it might even be stronger. I don't know. It would be cheaper and it would go a whole lot quicker than it even did. So that's a kind of another potential option there on ways that you could do this. There's a bunch of different ways to build the same basic thing. You can also see that on the bottom row down here, I used that 3/4 inch piece of material, piece of pine, instead of using a full 2x4 to get this to fit in the desired location that I wanted while having enough space to comfortably fit that top bin up there. I needed to shrink the height by just a little bit to get it to fit right. So putting that 3/4 inch piece at the bottom rather than a 1.5 inch 2x4 got me that space, and I was able to keep the equal spacing and do that and still maintain kind of enough room in between those bins where they're really packed in there close so that we're using our space efficiently, but also enough room in between them to where we can get them out of there and they're not hitting each other. As far as why I don't have an 18th bin, I have a 17th bin. You will see that right now when I show you where I'm going to put this. So this isn't the final resting location for this. This is going to actually go down in my basement, down in the storage area of our basement. It's a really tight, narrow room, and so there's not a whole lot of places to film down there where it shows things, you know, well. So I chose to build this out in the garage, kind of mock it up. It's all put together. I'm going to take this thing back apart. All I got to do is take the bottom rails and the top rails off, carry the ladder pieces down the stairs, and then I'm going to reassemble it in that location. And there is a huge beam that kind of supports the upper floor of our house that goes right through here, so there was not room for that. And so that's why we only have 17 bins rather than 18 bins, but you'll see that when I put this footage in there. Also, one fun fact and thing to consider if you're thinking about building this is not all black totes with yellow lids are created equal. These are 3 different totes from 3 different retailers. We have Home Depot, Menards, and then Lowe's, the ones that I used. They're all 27-gallon totes, and they look pretty darn similar at face value. But the ones from Home Depot and the ones from Menards are slightly more narrow and slightly taller. So make sure you measure your totes. If you're trying to copy my designs, I use the ones from Lowe's, and they're really the only ones that'll fit well. If you try to put either one of these totes in there, it's going to be they're going to almost kind of want to try to fall in, and they're going to try to hit the bin underneath them. So mine's designed for Lowe's totes that are slightly wider and shorter. So overall, I think that's a wrap. I'm not going to make a set of plans for this because I have a kind of a very specific design that I've got going here, and mine are designed for the totes that are at Lowe's. If you're using the totes that are sold other places, you may have to make an adjustment or two based on the height of those totes. But I did try to put in pictures of my plans, and if you go back and pause the video, you'll definitely, I think, be able to get enough information that you can build these pretty easily, coming up with your own plans and kind of figuring out your own scenario there. So if you like the video, please, hitting the like button definitely helps me and the channel, and it's very much appreciated. If you guys enjoyed this, I really encourage you to go down in the comments section and tell me what you thought of this, or how you would change it, or maybe if you're building something like this, or if you've got a better way to store totes. I don't know how it could get much better than this, but I'm sure that there's going to be something out there. And then if you want to see some of my other storage stuff, or what, you know, stuff like this, hopefully that's useful that I build in the future, I encourage you guys to subscribe and see what other stuff we got going around on the channel. But other than that, I hope this helped in some way, and I hope to see you guys in another video.